we have Federico Simoncelli.
That's correct. Yeah.
With container management in ManageIQ. Federico, whoo!
Hey. Yeah. Yeah, I brought some friends. So yeah. Yeah. So let's try to start because the agenda is going to be pretty packed, and actually, I need to time myself because. Let's see. Okay, so container management in ManageIQ 1 year in review. I'm sure you have many questions about this title, what it is about, what is container management, who I am, and all of that. But there's a single question, right, that you have been asking me the most, and I don't know if you can guess what it is. It's where I'm from. Right? So I'll try to, with some help of these. Yeah, nice. Okay. Yeah, finally you know exactly where I come from. Tiny city on the east coast of Italy, very similar to Tuscany. If you ever get anywhere near this, come visit me. I'll show you around. So let me know if you ever happen to be there. Beautiful place. Feel free to give me a call. Other than that, who I am. I joined Red Hat in 2011, beginning of the year. And I've been working in Rev for 3-4 years. After that, I moved to container management, which I haven't said anything about yet. But I'll explain it in a minute, what's that about. So that's pretty much about me. I'm managing the team of container management roughly since a few months, 1 year, something like that. And let's get to it. What's that about? So let's take a look at the agenda, which I hope you'll appreciate how clean it is. We'll be done in few minutes. We'll be done, right? I'll just show you the history of container management in the last year, our experience with ManageIQ, and how successful it was. And the new features, the last release, the ongoing release of Darga, what we introduced recently. So again, what's container management? I'm sure you heard about containers, all of you. If you open any kind of site about IT technologies and so on, you hear a lot about containers and so on. Just to explain it in a couple of words, well, it's packaging your software into images that you run on a single machine, and then you want to scale out, right? And how do you do that? You need some kind of orchestration to take that software and those applications and run them in a cluster. And to do that, there are pretty successful projects like Kubernetes and OpenShift that builds on top of Kubernetes that are doing the orchestration of these applications in a cluster. And what we wanted to do was empower ManageIQ to do advanced management with Kubernetes and OpenShift, right? Just a couple of words about Kubernetes, the runtime that does the orchestration, cluster orchestration of the container images and how the application are defined with very high-level entities, right? And OpenShift is delivering to you the continuous delivery of your application, building those images, and doing upgrades of your application, scaling them out, and so on. Just to give you a quick overview of what's the size of the effort, we have a small graph here to see over the time how we delivered this solution inside of ManageIQ, right? The ability to integrate with Kubernetes and OpenShift. We started early 2015 with few people and very few PR to begin with, and the trending is growing, as you see in number of PRs. The number of core engineers and authors is a little bit squashed because of the number of the PRs, but we are growing also in people that are involved into this effort. So I hope that the introduction was clear enough for you to understand at least what we are talking about. Let's start with the history of this effort, right? Touching all the subjects that we had to face to actually bring a new provider into ManageIQ at a time where, you saw Greg yesterday when he talked about namespace and all of that, where we have been so lucky to start before that, right? So, yeah. So we started when you saw all the spaghetti code. Yeah, that's where we started. And not only we introduced a new provider, we introduced a new type of provider, because basically it's not just another provider of VMs or instances. No, it's containers which are, slightly different in some regards. So we had to introduce all new entities for that into ManageIQ. So I took this notation for these initial slides. We'll have at the bottom the timeline, right, of how we progressed over time. So this is beginning of February 2015. And the green V that you see or might not see because they're too dark on the right, they kind of check for items, vital items, right, key aspects of feature that you have to have in a provider to be a provider in ManageIQ, right? So these are the key aspects, and you will see many of those along the slide. There's also another badge about new things that we introduced, because for containers, we had the need of new things in ManageIQ, and we introduced those. Those will be marked with a new badge that you'll see close to the bullet points, basically. So beginning of February, we introduced the backend, which means interacting with Kubernetes API, collect the entities. For that, we had a new gem called Kube Client, which is actually natively speaking to the Kubernetes API that at that time were beta, right? So we experienced all those changes in the API that were going on at the beginning in Kubernetes. And 1 week was never the same like the previous one. So there were a few things that we had to catch up at that time with, right? And we were heavily involved with the Kubernetes community at that time, because there were many things that we wanted to show in ManageIQ and they weren't reported by Kubernetes. So we had lots of PR merge also in Kubernetes to give ManageIQ all the information that we wanted to show, and we needed to do cross correlations and so on. So check, we had the backend, very few entities, nodes, services, container groups, which are pods, containers, labels, and selectors. As we progressed, we reached March, and we introduced the event catcher, which was a very successful integration with ManageIQ, because it turns out that it gave us all the things that we needed to catch events from Kubernetes. It's just a WebSocket where you receive events, and from the ManageIQ side, we just parse them and process them. So we kind of found everything that we needed in ManageIQ. We just had to kind of add the very specific Kubernetes bits. Again, very heavily involved with Kubernetes, because we really wanted to kind of standardize these events that are collected. At that time, events were even less than an API. They were not consistent over different events and so on. So we, again, we went there, we pushed some consistency in these events, and we moved on integrating it in ManageIQ. Then great effort from the core UI team of ManageIQ that helped us out to add the UI for containers. I think it was several hundreds of lines of code. Then Harpreet helps us has helped us to push this large PR with very basic information about Kubernetes. Again, the very basic entities, nodes, container groups, services, and containers. This was beginning of March, and again, this was all done with no namespacing whatsoever, nothing of all those fancy things that you saw yesterday. So we actually introduced all of these as new types in ManageIQ with not a specific place where to work in, but all across the code base. In May, again, another item that is a green V, right, a green check for us, which was creating reports. And again, here, the integration was very simple. We just had to add a bunch of entity names in a list, right? It was just about finding where to place them. So I am really looking forward to see what Greg explained yesterday of the when you generate a new provider, all these things are for you done automatically, right? And again, it was just about mentioning what are the class names, and we had the report. At the same time, basically, we introduced also the OpenShift provider, which was an extension on the Kubernetes one, leveraging all the additional API that OpenShift provides you for builds and routes and so on. And so we added those entities as well. And we also started a new gem, also that one very heavily based on the Kubernetes one, because the majority of the code is very much reused, both in the gems and in ManageIQ. As I mentioned earlier, the event in early June, we added the timeline UI. And I'm really happy to see that Dan and Serena has plans for that, because number of events that we receive from containers, from pods that are running, from services, from all the entities, is very high, right? And you might even see it here. I'm not sure. How do you? There should be a way to point. Yeah. So as you see, there are many events at the same time, because generally that's what might happen. And so having that kind of feature of being able to zoom in, zoom out in the event is going to be great, because those will be probably all collapsed, and then you can zoom and see each and every one. So right now, he is still the UI that you know, but I'm really happy to see that we are moving forward into this direction where you can show many more events. So beginning of June, we started exploring metrics. And we did that looking at what the community was using, which was InfluxDB. We had several problems with that. So we created a PR, we experimented with it, but it was not something ready to be used, because InfluxDB, how it was used with Kubernetes, right? In the Kubernetes project, right, they said, okay, so we are giving you the cluster runtime, but if you want metrics or anything else, it's an application for you to run. So it's up to you to create it. And InfluxDB was very simply created, but there was no seamless integration with authentication, authorization. Everyone could have seen metrics of everyone. There was no security whatsoever. So we experienced, we used it, but it was not enterprise ready or in any way secure enough for what we wanted to do. So we had a little bit of collaboration with the Ruby gem of InfluxDB as well. And we also had the time to introduce out-of-the-box reports. As I said earlier, we had the reports, and now we have out-of-the-box reports, because exactly those metrics empowered us to create these reports containing also metrics such as nodes by capacity, CPU and memory usage, the recently discovered pods and status, right? So those were introduced at the same time, because they kind of leveraged those metrics, even though the metrics were not enterprise ready or in any way committed into the code base. In June, we kept adding entities, such as images and registries. so that you could see very basic information about what are the images that are running in your cluster and the registries that are serving those images, basically. Roughly at the same time, we added the tagging support, so it's another green check for us. Although, you know how with the entities that you have in containers, right? They often quickly come and go, right? With pods and services. It's very much more dynamic than VMs. So yes, we added tagging support, so you can go in and manually add tags to the entities. But it's probably not very much usable in very dynamic clusters, right? So what we are planning now is to automate this tagging with a system where you define rules, and based on those rules, labels, and so on, you automatically tag inside of ManageIQ the entities. And that's an ongoing effort, but I'm sure that will help you very much to automatically tag the entities as soon as they are discovered. And at the same time, we also introduced the cross-linking. So we knew that this was something that only ManageIQ could have given us, right? The ability to, dive from the very abstract entities that Kubernetes is giving you, such as services, pods, and so on, down to the physical world, such as the instances, hosts, storage, and network. So what we did, basically, I'm pretty sure you're familiar with this diagram. You already saw it probably many times, that you can travel across all the entities, top down or bottom up. And that's essentially what we did. The innovation here was to be able to do that across different providers. So that's what was introduced with the help of the core team of ManageIQ. We started with the cross-linking of OpenStack, Rev, and VMware. So these were the initial underlying providers that we use, because OpenShift is running most often, right, as VMs or instances on top of these infrastructure or clouds. So essentially, you're standing on a pod, you see that it's running on a certain node, and from that node, you can reach the underlying infrastructure. It's just like you will find it in the UI down there, basically. So you have all the relationships. So this is a node with all the information, and the relationship, as you see, are down here. And with this relationship here, you cross to the underlying infrastructure and the VM that is actually running that node. August was very key for us, right? Because basically, we switched to use Kubernetes API v1, finally stable, right? So we had a little bit more of stability underneath, right? And so we froze on that API and kept building on top of that. Finally, the pluggable providers, what you heard yesterday, were introduced, and we had a lot of help from, again, the ManageIQ core team to move our, spaghetti code, because it was just as all the other providers, spread across all the code base, to kind of reorganize that finally in a, consistent place where you could find everything about containers, Kubernetes, and OpenShift in a single place. And that was done very quickly, I think less than a week or something like that. So great effort there. The containers were finally enabled by default, because up until now, yes, we had the container support in ManageIQ, and all those things were merged and so on, but they were not enabled by default. So you had to enable them in the configuration. And then since August 18th, they were finally enabled by default. And in September, we introduced the Topology Widget to display and correlate all the entities that you have collected from the clusters into a very nice graph and diagram. You already saw that in the previous presentation, and I'm sure you'll see even more of that in, going forward in ManageIQ at large. but we introduced it for OpenShift and Kubernetes, where you could see all the nodes, services, pods, and so on, all connected. And as you see, we have many different entities that are, they're more like a graph rather than a hierarchy. Here, you can enable and disable them. At the top, you can also see the underlying infrastructure, the VMs, the hosts, and so on. And depending on your needs or what you're looking for, you can enable and disable them. September, we introduced smart state analysis. I believe you're kind of familiar to some degree with smart state analysis in ManageIQ. So we added that for containers, right, in a fashion that makes sense for containers as well, where, well, the libraries and the engine that is in ManageIQ to do smart state analysis for VM is very powerful, has many different aspects that can collect. Not all of them made sense for containers, such as host names, right? A container image doesn't really have an host name when it's created, or users and groups. So we kind of focused only on the things that made sense, right, for containers, and we leveraged those. And we reused as much as possible of the engine of smart state analysis. We kickstarted a project that is called Image Inspector, which is written in Go, and it's able to crack open the image and expose that using WebDAV to ManageIQ, right? And then after that, all the regular scanning that you have in ManageIQ that is able to identify what are the packages and so on, it runs as regularly as in any other case. Again, we had also the collaboration with the libraries of Go and so on, because there's always something to do, right? Like you never find something that works out of the box. So again, about smart state analysis, just to mention a little bit the architecture of how it was implemented. So we have the scanning logic in ManageIQ that you're familiar with. There's a little bit of orchestration going on with the master API server of Kubernetes, where we instantiate a pod of image inspector that is able to, well, it runs on a node and create a target image, it cracks that open, and then it exposes that through WebDAV to the scanning logic of ManageIQ, which collects all the information into the database. And these information are pretty much showed and displayed to you in a very familiar way. Because again, also for the UI, we reuse all the components that ManageIQ comes with. So the packages, list of packages, all the description, versions, and so on, they're just what you're familiar with. In October, we started introducing the dashboard. We actually, well, the effort's much earlier than that, but kind of concretized at the beginning of October. And this is the very initial part of the dashboard. You saw the dashboard earlier. That's how it got after, a few months. So this was the beginning, because if you remember, all the metrics that we implemented were based on InfluxDB, and for us it was not good enough at that point. So the only thing that we could have shown at that time were the entities, number, you could have reach them, and so on. This was the very initial PR that was merged in October. So again, going back to metrics, so we went back to metrics and said, OK, so we have to show metrics in the dashboard, right? So that's pretty much when we decided to go with Ocular, because that's what was chosen by OpenShift as primary metrics collector and engine inside of OpenShift. And it was fairly easy. We had basically everything that we needed from the previous experience. So it was just about replacing the engine that was collecting the data. That was about it. We were collecting the images, the metrics from Ocular. We were using the same authentication that we use against the API, because Ocular is fairly well integrated with the authentication authorization of Kubernetes. And our roles inside of OpenShift allowed us to collect the metrics of all the relevant entities. So we went with real-time, right? What you know in ManageIQ as real-time metrics for container pods and nodes. And we were collecting, and we are still collecting CPU cores and memory for all the entities and network for nodes at that time. These are recently changed, but I'll mention it later. Again, one slightly different note about what ManageIQ was doing in the past is about the CPU cores. So up until we introduced them, the unit in ManageIQ is megahertz, right? So we picked CPU cores because that's what you use in OpenShift and Kubernetes to set quota limits and so on. So you expect to see the same unit in ManageIQ as well, because that's what you set when you give some quota to some user, to some project in Kubernetes and OpenShift. A new thing that we introduced was rolling up to multiple parents, which basically means, well, when you have VMs, you have a hierarchy, right? You have a VM that is inside of a cluster, the cluster is in a data center, and so on. So you just do a roll up to a single parent, right? A single VM is rolled up to a single cluster, and the cluster to the data center, and so on. So that's what was present so far in ManageIQ. So we extended that to have multiple parents, because in containers, in Kubernetes, you have a single pod can, well, it's part of a service or a replicator controller, or, well, many other, it's more like a graph. So we found that the code in ManageIQ was very much friendly for that. So we just had to tweak a few things here and there, and we were able to do the roll-ups of a single pod to the multiple parents, right? It belongs to a provider, to a project, right? To a service and to a replicator, right? Not all of them are always, relevant, but in some cases, they're all relevant, right? So now you can see the roll-ups not only for the project and for the provider, but also for the other entities like services. So you can say how much a service is using in terms of cores and memory, and now even network, and we'll see about that. Same thing for replicators. In early December, we introduced the view of the single dashboard, right? So when you stand on a provider, then you are presented with these little icons up here that you saw in the previous talk as well. That allows you to switch to the dashboard for that single provider. And again, it was a very initial. Nothing changed so far from the previous implementation of from the previous slide where I showed you the dashboard. Finally, in December, January, we kind of started using the metrics that we introduced earlier with Ocular to add gauges and heat maps for CPU memory and nodes, memory and CPU utilization. And so we started building the dashboard, and you'll see that we are even further. We progressed into that at the beginning. January is 2016, obviously, right? And we also added the network trends. So as you see, we were approaching to the initial, project of how the dashboard should have looked like, right? So we had all the data, so it was just a matter of building the dashboard out of that. And we come to Darga, and so I'm really proud to show what we have been able to achieve in these few months, right? Darga is not out yet, but this is what we did so far up until now. So we had a little bit of planning beginning of January, then a research phase in right after that, 3 weeks. And we started in February, right? And as anything else in ManageIQ, we had the freeze in mid-April. 6 core contributors with new engineers as well that helped us. And the current status that you'll see here is the end of sprint 41, 15 weeks of development. So it's, again, in the timeline is these last bits down here. So everything that you saw so far, right, was what was achieved for Capablanca and the months after that. So just to summarize what we did for Darga was chargeback for containers. So this was, again, one of those bits that were missing to be a fully featured provider in ManageIQ. So we closed that gap with the chargeback. OpenScup Integration, which instead is something new that we introduced to do collection of security vulnerabilities of images. We extended the cross-linking, covering also other providers, cloud providers such as Amazon GCE. And we started the effort of the OpenShift deployment, so which means it's basically being able to deploy OpenShift from ManageIQ, provisioning the nodes, right, the VMs that will become nodes, and so on. And being able to automatically have this provider defined into ManageIQ as soon as you deploy that. We also had additional enhancements that they're not minor in any way, because the multi-endpoint for Ocular metrics is a big one, at least for me. It's 1 year that I was waiting for these, right? It was a very needed feature, right? Because so far, right, the metrics were collected from ManageIQ, always from the same endpoint of the API, and that was kind of problematic for OpenShift and Kubernetes. So we had a way to do that, but using different endpoints and new endpoints to collect metrics is very much, it helps us so much in the deployment of OpenShift and in the cleanness of the entire cluster. We added support for collecting the metrics of network from pods, which was missing, as I mentioned earlier. This is available, obviously, where Ocular supports that, Hipster supports that. Hipster is the component inside that is running inside of your Kubernetes or OpenShift cluster that is collecting the metrics and storing them into Ocular. So where that is supported, we are able now to collect them. And we improved even further the dashboard with pods and new image trends. And we extended the support for bills and volumes in the entities that we have and we collect. So again, a little bit more notes about chargeback. So basically, it's the ability to, based on utilization of pods, right, to create reports of chargeback for those entities. So what we did is basically so you can create these reports based on a single provider or multiple providers. Doesn't really matter. You have rates that you attach to each provider, and those will define what are the rates of each metrics component, right? And then the utilization of those pods are grouped up into projects. So basically, you have per project how much is the cost, right? And we also take note of short-living entities to some degree, right? Pods that were created just for a short time, right? And then deleted. Same thing for projects. We have a way to, so if you create a new project with the same name of a project that existed in the same month or week, you want to differentiate those, so we are able to do that. We will display whether the project was deleted or not, whether, all this kind of information that can be then processed by your billing system, because you can export these in several formats. Again, CPU, cores, memory, and network were available, again, if your hipster supports that. And so this is pretty much it for what we did so far. We have many ideas to how to improve that. We'll see at the end. We went in and did the OpenScup integration, a couple of more notes about this. So as you saw earlier in the image inspector and smart state analysis diagram, right? We are opening the image and we are exposing that. We are not only doing that anymore, we are also running OpenScup on top of that, and we are presenting the report to ManageIQ so that it can be collected and stored. And each and every rule that is run against those images, you can do policies against those, right? So of any kind. You can leverage all the policies engine that you have in ManageIQ against this information, right? So you can create policies that based on a certain event of scanning the image, then a condition is evaluated, right? And you can say if there's any vulnerability that is medium high, right? Do something. And we try to give, as much as possible, a really good out-of-the-box experience for who wants to go with this feature. So you basically have some profiles that you can attach to the provider. And then there's one action that we introduced, which ManageIQ didn't have, which is about annotation the images in OpenShift with the result of the policy evaluation, right? So according to your policy and how you define it, you're able to mark, right, those images in OpenShift as trustworthy or not, right? And then OpenShift will prevent the execution of those images that, based on your policies, you deemed not secure enough. So that's a new action that you will find and you can use to actually leverage this feature. And again, if you're familiar with the OpenScup report, we are also providing that, right? So if you already are familiar with that and you want to consume that, then we show you the original report that you're all familiar with, and you can kind of investigate that better. So both automation, right, with policies and so on, but also UI side so that you can actually inspect those. The multi-endpoints, as I mentioned, you're now able to define the Ocular endpoint, right, which could be different from the, is oftenly different from the API endpoint. So now you can just specify that and follow entirely the OpenShift documentation to do the deployment, and you don't have to do any additional step in order to expose that to ManageIQ, and you'll just use the regular endpoint that you prepared, public endpoint for the metrics to be collected. And again, like you can validate the endpoint so that you know in advance if everything is correct, right, and so on. And finally, we also added the Deterrents that I mentioned earlier. So now the dashboard really started to really look like what we saw earlier, right? With all the data that we are collecting, right? All the metrics, the image creation trends, the pods creation and deletion trends. So you can easily spot from the dashboard if there's anything that might go wrong in your cluster, right? A spike in the creation of the pods or deletion of the pods. You can easily see that here. So the effort that we started on deployment had really many things in mind, right? We had many things in mind because we really wanted to give a solution that is enterprise ready for you to easily deploy OpenShift. So we had several use cases how to, how you might want to deploy, right? On existing machines, right? That could be VMs that you have anywhere, or bare metal, right? Or by provisioning these VMs from ManageIQ itself, right? You have providers, and you want to provision them from there. So these were the initial the initial metrics of the items that we wanted to support. Lots of dependencies here with many components, OpenShift, Ansible, which is doing the real deployment, and many other things. Again, also in this regard, right, like you might not think about it, but also the multi-endpoint really kind of simplified this part, right, because the deployment it's now much more standardized. Again, yeah, great. So it's 39 on my clock. So yeah, I can speed it up, but that's why I'm starting my clock. OK, so then I'll just race through these. Again, we want to support all the single multi-master, internal, external, etcd, right, giving you a very enterprise-ready deployment, right? And that's pretty much it. These are not commitment of any kind, right? These are just things that I heard around there. It's not even a roadmap, right? It's just ideas that I heard. So OpenShift templates, lifecycle, parity of feature with Kubernetes provider, like metrics, right? Extended chargeback with more features. Maintenance mode for nodes, right? So you can schedule maintenance from ManageIQ, cross-linking of storage and network, and support cluster upgrades. So these are just ideas that I heard out there and just reporting them here. And quickly get to know the team. So if you're in this list, please raise your hand so that everyone can see you and come and come and speak to us, right? Anything that you want to ask or suggest. This is how you get in touch with us. And I'm finishing 3 minutes short, so up to you.
Any questions?
I just want to point out one thing, that the containers team was basically the first non-core ManageIQ team.
I forgot to mention that.
No, and as Federico pointed out, they started with the non-namespaced container mess. Or I'm sorry, the provider mess that we had to deal with before we started namespacing things. They were amazing to work with. It's a fantastic team, and the speed at which they put new features in was phenomenal. So thanks so much for being a part of the team.
Thank you.
Last comments, questions?
I can just, my voice is loud now. The question I have is there a general inclination to be able to offer more support for OpenShift? And I ask this question because my organization is going to make a choice soon in this area. So is there better support for OpenShift? What about cases where you're just bringing a native Docker container?
Okay.
Or other fast providers?
That's an excellent question, actually. And so I assume that you refer to the fact that I mentioned Kubernetes, but now you're also mentioning Docker, right? OK, so definitely, so we introduced a new type, right? So now it's up to everyone else to contribute. And if anyone wants to add, I don't know, Docker Swarm, how is it called? Yeah, so that's up to the community to come in and do the work and use the same entities that we have in some way and fill in those data. For what we are mostly focused on, and we try every day just because it's easier for us. So OpenShift use is so much, and experience is so much quicker and easier to use than anything else. So that's why the engineers are using it, because it's so much easier, and that's why we're developing on that. And there are choices, right, enterprise choices behind that of metrics, right, that were the community in Kubernetes is not still clear what the metrics are. So it's easier for us to support OpenShift because it's what we use every day. And Kubernetes there's nothing supported, right? It's community. So, but it's you can hook it up to Kubernetes and have it in working, but not with all the features that I showed you, because every day we work with OpenShift. That's
All right. I think we can wrap up. And
Yeah.
if you have more questions, we can talk to
Sure.
Federico outside. There will be a break until 11 o'clock, so please come back on time. Thank you.